The comments came in an interview where he said Russia is much bigger and stronger and at some point size will win. He also criticised European leaders, saying they're not handling the war well and that he believed presidential elections needed to be held in Ukraine, suggesting without them the country wasn't properly democratic.
Magazine, he also was extremely critical of European leaders who he said were too weak and politically correct to control immigration in their own countries. And he made it very clear he includes the UK on that list of decaying countries.
Hello, everybody.
Donald Trump hit out at most of the European leaders he welcomed to the White House just a few months ago. And he was also critical of President Zelensky, as he gave a candid assessment of the war in Ukraine and who will probably come out on top.
Okay, so this is absolutely wild and potentially catastrophic. President Trump is on the verge of starting a war in Latin America, like an actual military conflict with Venezuela, and it's all blowing up right now in the most chaotic way possible. Trump has been threatening military strikes against Venezuelan drug cartels. He's been threatening to close Venezuelan airspace. He's been having phone calls with Venezuelan dictator Nicolas Maduro, trying to force him out of power, and none of it is working. Maduro is defiant. The regime change push is failing, and now Trump's in the Oval Office with his top advisors trying to figure out what the hell to do next. Does he back down and look weak? Or does he escalate and potentially drag America into a Latin American quagmire that could make Iraq look simple?
But before we go any further, real quick, let's be honest. You can't really trust mainstream media anymore. That's why we built Pump Politics, to bring you real stories, real context, and no corporate spin. If you want to stay ahead of the headlines, join our free newsletter. We'll send the news straight to your inbox every day. Just click the link in the description to join. And if you just want to support what we're doing, join us, be part of the community that actually cares about the truth. All right, let's get back to the video.
Which country right now is in the stronger negotiating position?
Well, there can be no question about it. It's Russia. It's a much bigger country. You don't have the cards. You're buried there. Your people are dying.
Mr. Trump's position has not changed much in the last 8 months, and he will soon respond to the latest US peace proposals. President Trump was dismissive of European efforts to try to resolve the war in Ukraine and of how they govern their own countries, claiming that without a change in border policies, some of their nations will not be viable any longer.
But most European nations...
Here's what's happening. Trump has been obsessed with getting rid of Maduro for years. The Venezuelan leader is a socialist dictator who's turned his country into an economic disaster. Millions of Venezuelans have fled. The drug trade through Venezuela has exploded. And Trump sees Maduro as everything wrong with Latin America. So Trump's been pushing hard for regime change, threatening sanctions, threatening military action, trying to force Maduro to step down. And this week, Trump warned that strikes against Venezuelan drug cartel targets would commence very soon. Like he put a timeline on it. He said it's about to happen. But here's the problem. Maduro isn't backing down. On Monday, he held a massive rally in Caracas with his supporters and proclaimed, "We do not desire a peace of slaves, nor do we want a peace of colonies." That's a direct shot at Trump. That's Maduro saying, "I'm not going anywhere, and I'm not taking orders from Washington." And Trump confirmed he had a phone call with Maduro on Sunday, a phone call where apparently nothing got resolved. Maduro didn't agree to leave. He didn't agree to any of Trump's demands. So now Trump's stuck. He's made all these threats and Maduro is calling his bluff. And it gets worse, because Trump already ordered one airstrike. Yeah, there was already a military strike in the Caribbean, targeting what the administration said was a Venezuelan drug trafficking operation. And that strike is now causing a huge controversy, because there are reports that the US conducted what's called a double tap strike. That's when you hit a target and then you come back and hit it again, after people show up to help the wounded. And double tap strikes are really controversial. They might violate US military law, they might violate international law, and they're exactly the kind of tactic that terrorist groups use that we condemn. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt confirmed there was a second airstrike on Monday, and she attributed it to Admiral Frank M. Bradley's authority, but she denied that there was any kill everybody order, even though reports suggest that's exactly what happened. So now we've got questions about whether Trump ordered war crimes in the Caribbean, whether his military commanders exceeded their authority, whether this whole Venezuela operation is being run in a way that violates the laws of war. And all of this is happening while Trump is threatening even more strikes that he says are coming very soon. Now Trump's defenders are going to say this is about fighting drug cartels. They're going to say Venezuela is a narco state that's flooding America with drugs. They're going to say Maduro is harboring criminals and terrorists. They're going to frame this as Trump being tough on the drug trade and protecting American national security. And look, there's no question that Venezuela has major problems with drug trafficking. There's no question that Maduro's regime is corrupt and terrible for the Venezuelan people. Those things are true. But starting a war over it, conducting airstrikes that might be war crimes, threatening to invade or occupy parts of Venezuela, That's insane. That's how you create a disaster that makes Afghanistan and Iraq look like success stories. Because Venezuela is a sovereign country, they have a military, they have allies, including Russia and China, who would love to see the US get bogged down in another unwinnable conflict. And the Venezuelan people, even the ones who hate Maduro, they're not going to welcome American troops as liberators. They're going to see it as Yankee imperialism, as the United States invading their country. And that's going to turn into an insurgency that could last for years. And here's the political calculation Trump is making. If he backs down now, if he doesn't follow through on his threats, he looks weak. His whole brand is being the tough guy who keeps his promises. If he says strikes are coming very soon, and then they don't come, his base is going to be disappointed. His critics are going to say he's all talk. But if he escalates, if he actually starts bombing Venezuela or sending troops, he could be starting a war that destroys his presidency. That costs American lives. That turns into a political nightmare heading into the midterms. There's no good option here. Trump has painted himself into a corner, and now he's trying to figure out how to get out. So over the next 20 minutes, we're going to break down exactly what Trump is threatening to do in Venezuela. We're going to look at the controversial airstrike that's already happened and whether it violated the law. We're going to talk about why regime change in Venezuela is way harder than Trump thinks. And we're going to figure out what it means if Trump actually follows through and starts a war in Latin America. Because this isn't some distant hypothetical. This is happening right now. Trump is making decisions this week that could lead to military conflict. Let's get into it. Alright, so let's dig into the details of what Trump is actually planning and why this Venezuela situation is so dangerous. Because Trump's not just making vague threats, he's holding meetings in the Oval Office about military options. He's already ordered at least one strike, and he's publicly promising more action is coming soon. This is real, and it could spiral out of control fast. So let's start with the context. Venezuela under Nicolás Maduro has been a disaster. The economy collapsed. Hyperinflation destroyed people's savings. Basic goods disappeared from stores. The healthcare system fell apart, and millions of Venezuelans fled the country, creating one of the largest refugee crises in the Western Hemisphere. Meanwhile, Maduro consolidated power. He rigged elections. He cracked down on opposition. He turned Venezuela into an authoritarian state. And the drug trade exploded because Maduro's regime is either complicit in it or too corrupt and weak to stop it. Trump has wanted Maduro gone since his first term. Back then, Trump imposed harsh sanctions on Venezuela. He recognized opposition leader Juan Guaido as the legitimate president. He talked about military options, but none of it worked. Maduro stayed in power. The sanctions hurt ordinary Venezuelans more than they hurt the regime, and Guaido's opposition movement eventually collapsed. So Trump's first attempt at regime change in Venezuela was a complete failure, and now in his second term, Trump is trying again, but with even more aggressive tactics. Here's what Trump is threatening now. First, airstrikes against what he calls Venezuelan drug cartel targets. Trump says these cartels are operating with Maduro's protection, that they're using Venezuelan territory to traffic drugs into the United States, and that he's going to start hitting them with military force. He said this week that strikes would commence very soon. That's not ambiguous. That's Trump putting a timeline on military action. Second, Trump is threatening to close Venezuelan airspace. That would mean shooting down Venezuelan aircraft or preventing them from flying. That's an act of war. You can't just close another country's airspace. That's a military blockade. And third, Trump is openly pushing for regime change. He wants Maduro out. He's had phone calls with Maduro trying to negotiate his exit. He's apparently offered Maduro options for exile, but Maduro is saying no. He's not leaving, and Trump is running out of non-military ways to make him go. Now let's talk about the airstrike that already happened, because this is where things get really controversial. According to reports, the U.S. conducted a strike in the Caribbean, targeting a Venezuelan drug trafficking operation. The official story is that this was hitting cartel targets, taking out bad guys who are smuggling drugs, but there are serious questions about how the strike was conducted. Reports suggest the U.S. hit the target once, then came back and hit it again after people arrived at the scene. That's the double tap strike I mentioned earlier, and double tap strikes are extremely controversial. The reason is simple. When you hit a target and people show up to help the wounded, those people might be medics, civilians, bystanders. They're not combatants, and hitting them with a second strike could be a war crime. It's a tactic that terrorist groups use. The U.S. has condemned other countries for doing it, and now we might have done it ourselves. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt confirmed there was a second strike, but she attributed it to Admiral Frank M. Bradley exercising his authority. She denied there was any kill everybody order. But the fact that she has to deny a kill everybody order tells you how bad this looks. Because if there was such an order, if U.S. military commanders were told to kill everyone at the target site, including people rendering aid, that would be clearly illegal. That would violate the laws of armed conflict. That would be a war crime. And even if there wasn't an explicit order, the fact that a double tap strike happened raises huge questions about what rules of engagement Trump's military is operating under. And this is all happening without congressional authorization. Trump hasn't asked Congress for permission to conduct military operations in Venezuela or the Caribbean. He's just doing it. He's using his authority as commander-in-chief to order strikes. But the Constitution gives Congress the power to declare war, and even if you don't call this a war, even if you call it counterterrorism or counter-narcotics operations, there are laws about how the president can use military force without congressional approval, and Trump might be violating those laws. Democrats in Congress are already asking questions. There could be hearings. There could be legal challenges. This could turn into a constitutional crisis on top of a foreign policy crisis. Now let's talk about why regime change in Venezuela is so much harder than Trump seems to think, because Trump's approach appears to be threaten Maduro, bomb some cartel targets, and Maduro will either flee or get overthrown. But that's not how this works. Maduro has been in power for over a decade. He's survived sanctions, coup attempts, international isolation, and economic collapse. He's not some fragile leader who's gonna fold because Trump bombs a few targets. Maduro has the support of Venezuela's military. He has the support of Cuba. He has backing from Russia and China, who provide economic and military assistance. He's dug in, and he's made it clear he's not leaving. Trump had a phone call with Maduro on Sunday, and according to reports, nothing was accomplished. Maduro didn't agree to step down. He didn't agree to any deal. He just told Trump no. And then the next day, Maduro held a huge rally in Caracas, where he gave this defiant speech about not wanting a piece of slaves or a piece of colonies. That's Maduro telling his supporters and telling Trump that he sees this as Venezuela resisting American imperialism, that he's not going to be pushed around by Washington. And that rhetoric plays well in Venezuela and in much of Latin America, where there's a long history of U.S. intervention that people resent. So if Trump follows through with more strikes, if he tries to escalate, what happens? Best case scenario, the strikes take out some cartel operations and Trump can claim a win, but Maduro stays in power. The regime doesn't collapse. And we're right back where we started, except now we've bombed a sovereign country without achieving our objective. Worst case scenario, the strikes kill civilians. They trigger a broader conflict. Venezuela retaliates somehow. Maybe they attack U.S. interests in the region. Maybe they shoot down a U.S. aircraft, and suddenly we're in a shooting war with Venezuela that neither side really wants, but neither side can back down from. And then there's the question of what comes next, if Maduro actually does fall, because regime change is the easy part. It's what comes after that's hard. Iraq taught us that. Afghanistan taught us that. Libya taught us that. You can't just overthrow a government and assume democracy and stability will follow. Venezuela is a mess. The institutions are broken. The economy is destroyed. The military is corrupt. If Maduro falls, there's no obvious successor who can unite the country. There could be civil war. There could be a power vacuum that gets filled by even worse actors, and if the U.S. is seen as responsible for creating that chaos, we own it. We'd be stuck dealing with the consequences for years. Trump's also facing the migration angle here, because millions of Venezuelans have already fled to neighboring countries and to the United States. They're part of the broader migration crisis at the southern border that Trump campaigned on. And Trump's immigration crackdown includes deporting Venezuelans back to Venezuela. But if Trump starts bombing Venezuela, if he destabilizes the country even more, that's going to create more refugees, more people fleeing north, more pressure on the border. So Trump's military actions could actually make the immigration problem he claims to care about worse. That's the irony. And there's a domestic political calculation here too. Trump's base loves tough talk on national security. They love the idea of bombing drug cartels and standing up to socialist dictators. If Trump follows through with strikes, his approval with Republicans might go up. But moderates and independents, they're going to have questions. They're going to ask, why are we starting another war? What's the plan? How much is this going to cost? How many American lives are at risk? And if this turns into a prolonged conflict, Trump could lose support fast. Remember how Iraq started out popular and then became a political albatross? The same thing could happen here. So Trump's in this impossible position. He's made threats he probably shouldn't have made. He's ordered at least one strike that's causing legal and political problems. And now he's got to decide, does he escalate and risk everything on regime change that might not work? Or does he back down and look weak? There's no good answer, and the fact that he's making these decisions in real time, that he's holding Oval Office meetings this week about Venezuela, it means we could be days away from a major military escalation. Let's talk about what that means. Okay, so let's break down what this actually means for Trump's presidency, for U.S. foreign policy, and for the region. Because if Trump follows through with his Venezuela threats, this could be one of the defining moments of his second term, and not in a good way. Here's point one. This is a test of Trump's credibility and his entire approach to foreign policy. Trump's brand is that he's the tough guy who keeps his promises. When he threatens something, he follows through. When he draws red lines, he enforces them. That's the image. But Venezuela is calling his bluff. Maduro isn't backing down. The threats haven't worked. So now Trump has to decide, does he follow through with military action to prove he's serious? Or does he find a way to back down without looking weak? And there's no obvious way to do the latter. If Trump says strikes are coming very soon, and then they don't come, everyone's going to notice. His supporters are going to be disappointed. His critics are going to say he's all talk. Foreign adversaries are going to think American threats are meaningless. That's a huge credibility problem. But if Trump does follow through, if he actually starts bombing Venezuela at scale, he's taking a massive risk. Because military action could go wrong in so many ways. Strikes could kill civilians, they could miss their targets, they could trigger retaliation. And if that happens, Trump owns it. This becomes Trump's war. And wars are politically dangerous, especially when they're wars of choice that didn't need to happen. Iraq destroyed George W. Bush's second term. Vietnam destroyed Lyndon Johnson's presidency. Trump could be walking into the same trap. A war that starts out looking tough and decisive, but turns into a quagmire that dominates everything and destroys his political capital. Point 2. This situation exposes how unprepared Trump's administration is for complex foreign policy crises. Because Trump doesn't seem to have thought through what happens after the strikes, he doesn't have a clear plan for regime change, he doesn't have a strategy for what comes after Maduro. He's just threatening military action and hoping it works out. That's not strategy, that's hoping. And hoping is not a plan. The fact that Trump is holding emergency meetings in the Oval Office this week suggests his team is scrambling. They thought the threats would work. They thought Maduro would fold, and now that he hasn't, they don't know what to do. That's incredibly dangerous when you're talking about military action. And the double tap strike controversy makes it even worse, because if the US conducted a strike that violated the laws of war, that's a massive problem. It opens up Trump and military commanders to potential war crimes investigations. It damages America's moral authority when we criticize other countries for violations, and it suggests that Trump's military is operating without clear rules or proper oversight. Who authorized the double tap strike? Was it Admiral Bradley acting on his own? Was it Trump? Was there an explicit order, or did commanders just assume that's what Trump wanted? These are questions Congress needs answers to, and if those answers are bad, this could become a major scandal. Point 3. The regional implications of this are huge and mostly negative for the United States, because Latin America is watching this very closely, and a lot of Latin American countries, even ones that don't like Maduro, they're not going to support US military intervention in Venezuela. They see it as the United States acting like an imperial power, invading a Latin American country, and that plays into decades of resentment about US intervention in the region. From the CIA coup in Guatemala, to the invasion of Panama, to the Bay of Pigs in Cuba, Latin Americans have long memories about US military operations in their neighborhood, and Trump bombing Venezuela is going to bring all of that history back. It's going to undermine US relationships across the region. And then there's the Russia and China angle, because both of those countries have invested heavily in Venezuela. They've provided economic assistance, military equipment, political support. If Trump overthrows Maduro, Russia and China lose a key ally in the Western Hemisphere, so they have strong incentives to help Maduro survive. That could mean more weapons, more economic aid, maybe even Russian or Chinese advisors helping Venezuela's military. And if US forces end up in combat with Venezuelan forces that are backed by Russian equipment and advisors, this could become a proxy war between the US and Russia. In Latin America, that's a nightmare scenario that could spiral out of control. Now let's talk about the domestic politics, because this is where it gets really interesting. Trump's calculation is probably that his base will love military action against Venezuela. They'll see it as Trump being tough on drugs, tough on cartels, tough on socialist dictators. And yeah, that'll probably play well with hardcore MAGA supporters. But everyone else, they're going to have questions. Independents don't want another war. Moderates are going to ask what the strategy is. And if American soldiers start coming home in body bags, support is going to collapse fast. Democrats in Congress are already starting to make noise about this. They're asking about the legal authorization for strikes. They're questioning whether the double tap was legal. They're demanding briefings and oversight. And if Trump escalates, you're going to see Democrats push back hard. There could be war powers resolution votes. There could be attempts to cut off funding. There could be impeachment talk if there's evidence of war crimes. Trump could find himself fighting a two-front war, one in Venezuela and one in Congress. And then there's the 2026 midterms angle, because if this Venezuela situation is still ongoing in 2026, if American forces are engaged in combat operations, or if we're dealing with the aftermath of regime change gone wrong, that's going to dominate the campaign. Democrats are going to run on Trump starting an unnecessary war. They're going to say he's reckless, that he's putting American lives at risk for no good reason. And that message could work especially if the war isn't going well. Remember how Iraq hurt Republicans in the 2006 midterms? The same dynamic could play out here if Trump gets bogged down in Venezuela. But here's the flip side. If Trump backs down, if he finds some way to de-escalate without following through on his threats, his base might not forgive him, because they've been promised action. Trump said strikes are coming very soon. If they don't come, or if they're just token strikes that don't achieve anything, Trump's supporters are going to feel betrayed. They're going to think Trump got outplayed by a third-rate dictator, and that could hurt Trump with the people who are most loyal to him. So Trump's got no good options. Escalate and risk a quagmire. Back down and risk looking weak. Either way, there's political danger. And the fact that Trump created this situation himself, that he made threats he probably shouldn't have made, means he's got nobody to blame but himself. Now let's talk about the broader implications for U.S. foreign policy, because if Trump goes through with regime change in Venezuela, it sets a precedent. It says the United States can overthrow foreign governments we don't like, that we can conduct military operations in sovereign countries without their permission, that American power isn't constrained by international law or norms, and that's going to make the rest of the world very nervous. Our allies are going to wonder if they're next, if they do something Washington doesn't like. Our adversaries are going to prepare for American military intervention. The whole international order becomes more unstable and more violent. And it's not like Venezuela is the only country Trump has problems with. Iran, North Korea, Cuba, there are lots of governments Trump doesn't like. If the Venezuela playbook is threaten them, bomb them, try to overthrow them, what's to stop Trump from using the same approach everywhere? You could end up with the United States in multiple simultaneous conflicts, multiple regime change operations, multiple interventions. That would stretch American military resources to the breaking point. It would drain the treasury. It would cost American lives. And it would make the United States look like an out-of-control imperial power that other countries need to band together to resist. So where does this leave us? Trump has threatened military strikes against Venezuela that he says are coming very soon. He's already ordered one controversial strike that might have violated the law. He's trying to force regime change, but Maduro isn't backing down. And now Trump's stuck trying to figure out whether to escalate or retreat. Both options are bad, and the decisions he makes this week could determine whether we end up in a major conflict in Latin America. This is one of the most dangerous foreign policy situations of Trump's presidency, and it's happening right now, in real time. We could be days away from strikes. We could be weeks away from American troops in combat, or Trump could find a way to back down and avoid the whole mess. We don't know yet, but we're about to find out, and the stakes couldn't be higher. Pay attention to this, because whatever Trump decides, it's going to have consequences for years to come.